opportunity to be here in lovely Rotterdam and talk about drug bereavement. I am Christine Berg-Tikkestad. I'm from Norway, Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. So I'm from the END project, and END is a Norwegian acronym for Drug Death Bereavement and Recovery Project. And in this session, you will hear me talk about the END project. Then my colleague Sally Lindemann is going to talk about living with siblings substance use. Then I'll return again and talk about bereaved parents. Before Lilian Selseng is going to talk about bereaved who use drugs. And finally, Aidan is going to talk about the social health of bereaved by drug-related death. First, we have no commercial relationship to disclose, but we are funded. We are funded by the Research Council of Norway. We are funded by the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, the city of Bergen, where Western Norway University of Applied Sciences is placed, and the Norwegian Directorate of Health, and also a private foundation called DAM. Oh, I went back, sorry. So we talked about living with people who use drugs, but in our project we have been looking into those who lost the people who use drugs, and specifically narcotics. And when we talk about drug-related death, we talk about deaths caused by the intake of substances classed as narcotics, and that's linked to drug use in various ways, like violence, suicide, infections, disease, or other health disorders. And as you, I guess, are all well known with, is that the number of drug-related deaths are rising, and especially in the US we have an epidemic. And in Europe we also have high numbers, and Norway, where we are from, have one of the highest numbers in Europe. From these numbers, in 2020 we had the third largest numbers when we see it in relation to the population. After we submitted the slides, we got new numbers from Norway. We had a little decrease in numbers last year, but this year it rised again. So this is a huge problem that affects a lot of people. What we see in Norway that is that it is an increasing number of heroin, morphine deaths, and like in the US, we see that there is a growing concern about synthetic opioids. So I already said that what the END project is and where we are situated, but I also want to mention when we started, and that was in 2017. And when we started in 2017, there was scarcely any research about drug death bereavement internationally. There were research project in the UK where Richard Ellerman participated, and Ronald Templeton with 107 bereaved, and William Feigemann in the US had done some research. But apart from that, when we did the systematic review, we only identified 8 studies. So we thought that this was an area that was very important to look into, especially of the high rates in Norway. And what we aimed to was to develop new knowledge and understanding about the consequences of drug-related death for bereaved family members, but also for friends. And that is important for us to say why we did that, was that we think that there are a lot of bereaved who are not get the attention they deserve to get, especially friends, who live with the people who use drugs, who perhaps even have a closer relationship than the family members. We also aim to develop new knowledge about needs and experience with help and support from health and social services, and propose new action options and measures to improve the bereaved's health and quality of life. And we have been pretty lucky because the Norwegian Director of Health early on noticed our project, so we are already written to guidelines in Norway. We also want to contribute to society's discourse on drug policy issues and, of course, reduce stigma. And additionally, since we are trying to get a full university approval, we wanted to contribute to the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences ambitions of qualifying the teachers to be doctors and professors. So this is how the E&D project looked like now. We started with only work package 1, but when we got funding from the Norwegian Research Council, we got money to develop a project that consists of 3 work packages. Work package 1 is about the bereaved. We have 3 studies there. The bereaved, in study 1, we study the consequences and strengths for the bereaved. In study 2, we study help and support. And in study 3, we study experiences before death, and that is about the siblings. Here we included in a survey 255 family members and close friends, and we interviewed 14 parents, 10 siblings about time after death, and 14 about time before death, and we also interviewed 18 close friends. In work package 2, we studied helpers, the service provisions, and there we did focus group interviews with public and non-governmental service providers from 6 municipalities in Norway. 105 people participated, and that was from municipalities that had the highest rates of overdoses in Norway. And finally, we have work package 3. Work package 3 is about knowledge translation and implementation. And as you may know, it usually takes around 17 years from we do the research to actually manage to implement the research into practice. And that's why we were very curious to see if we tried out a research circle with bereaved professional helpers from municipalities, non-governmental service providers, and researchers, we could change this to get the research into practice straight away. And here's our project group. We are 18 people, and the first 4 here on the top, we are going to present here today. We have 4 project members who are I told Lillian that I was going to by experience. And we have 4 PhD students, and the project group members have different professionals. We are social workers, nurses, psychological competence and sociology. I'm a social educator. Have I missed something then? Physiotherapy? Did I say that? Yeah. And we also have an advisory board. I'm not going to go into the advisory board. You can see here, like Lorna Templeton, who was in the UK study, she joined us. So that's very good. 4 international experts, so who has contributed a lot to our project. I'm going to move on to give you some overview of what we have done so far. From the work package 1, we have 5 studies about the parents, 4 that are published. And I'm going to I'm going to talk about the parents later, so I'm not going to say anything more about how they experience their bereavement. But what I can say for now is we found that they experience complex grief emotions and reactions, of course stigma, self-stigma, that they withdraw, and that they have high levels of prolonged grief symptoms. About Article 2, I investigated how do the parents adjust to life without the deceased, and that one of the main findings was that being needed by others, for example their children or the deceased children, really helped the parents to adjust to life. I also looked into positive growth, whether there were parents who experienced that. And many of those who did actually described that the stresses due to living with a person who uses drugs actually made them experience positive growth before losing their child. That they needed to get some meaning in life to continue and help their children. And the last article is from Eivind, who's going to present later, but this article, which is under review, he looked into drug that bereaved parents' perspectives and family interactions and help needs, and he found that family relationships are crucial for adjusting to the loss, and that many face obstacles when engaging in emotional-oriented conversation that could have enhanced family relationship. So that was from the sample about parents, but we have also done studies with the whole sample with family members and looked into levels of prolonged grief disorder. And here we found that the parents level, we haven't looked into the diagnosis and looked into the criteria because this is self-reported data, so we haven't said anything about diagnosis. We have looked at the cut-up in the instruments, and we report that 31% of the parents experienced high levels of prolonged grief symptoms, 21%, almost 22% of the siblings, and 20% of the children. What we also found was that there was the strongest association between high level of symptoms of prolonged grief and one since loss, which is natural. But those who experience high levels of prolonged grief also often had suicidal thoughts and withdrawal from others. The title of the article is "Does Time Heal All Wounds?" And we discussed that this takes a long time for the bereaved. Many of them report high levels, also 1 to 2 years after the death. So, let's see. I'm still at work package 1 and family members. We have also done articles about stigma. We'll talk about that in all the presentations, so I won't go into that. We've also done articles, Eivind has done, looked into whether the bereaved report that they get the help they need. And 80% of the bereaved ask for more help, and especially they ask for help to the children. In Fjerd and Dirigrov, we looked into what is the advice from the bereaved to the, what will matter in regards to policy. And the bereaved, they call for broad spectrum help, routinized help, respectful help, and competent help on a regular and long-term basis. And I think that's important to mention, especially since they report to have symptoms long after what we expect. Eivind will talk about social health. We looked into siblings. Sally will present that. She will talk about the time before death. So I'll run through here. And we also looked at bereaved who use drugs. They talk about that. And we also have our article about bereaved friends, which is in progress. I can just mention one of the results and that is that both the parents and the friends regards themselves as important for each other, and that is important to highlight from that article. From the work package 2 about service provision, we have 3 articles, and since I'm running out of time, I'm just going to go to lessons learned for now. So the END project has looked into drug death bereavement with both quantitative data, qualitative data, and mixed method. What we see is that drug-related deaths have many similarities to other sudden traumatic deaths. But perhaps there are some things that are unique, and that is especially the stigma and the spillover stigma, which complicates the grief process. And they report to have to be in huge need of formal and informal help and support. We didn't aim to study time before death, but when we talk to the bereaved, they all say that the time before death really influenced their bereavement and their grieving process. That is also one of the main findings from our project. We think that these bereaved is a heterogeneous group with various resources, and we think that professionals within substance use services can be important, and family perspectives should be included. That's it. So let me introduce you to the next speaker. That's my dear colleague, Dr. Sally Lindman. She's a social worker and a family therapist, and she'll talk about the siblings. Here you go.
Can you hear me? Yes, then I don't, because I am doing all those movements with my hands, so it's a good idea to have microphone there. Time before death greatly influence time after death, says Christina. And so my presentation has retrospective perspective, and it's siblings' voices we are talking about now. So how is life before losing brother or sister and relative death for siblings? And you surely remember work package 1 and study 3, time before death. So me and my co-authors, Lilian, Aina Löfberg and Lennart Luros, we have interviewed 14 siblings, 10 sisters, 4 brothers, who all have lost their brother or sister and relative death. The time after siblings' death have been from 3 months to 3 years. So it's differences, and also ages for siblings we talk with are really different. The youngest is 23 and then up to 61 years. And we have used narrative thematic analysis. So we present our results as stories. But first, yes, it's important to know something about time before death, but we also think that it's important to know something about the sibling perspective, because sibling relation really is different relation than the other family relations. It can be the longest relation, starting then you get the sibling and then continuing till the sibling dies, sometimes the whole life perspective. So siblings know a lot about upbringing, about happenings, crises in each other's lives. And siblings are really telling a family story. So in a way, through siblings, we get some pictures of how the time before death was for whole family. And And sibling relation is also that kind of special relation that while siblings are growing up, they often live in the same home, they are really close, but in adult age, they can more choose. It's more voluntary relationship, and you can have a really close relationship with your sibling, or you can have maybe not relationship at all. So that also was interesting to us to see at how the siblings describe their relationships to their brother or sister with problematic substance use. So then, stories. The first story we have called Surviving Difficult Family Life. It's about the whole thing. These siblings are telling about family situation where drug use is just one of many problems. They are telling about multi-generation problems. They are also telling about how long time consequences they get from having this kind of family situation. They often help their brothers and sisters, children, sometimes also grandchildren later on. So it's really a lifetime perspective to these siblings. And one of them who has one sibling has died from death, and one sibling still living with problematic substance use told it that way. It's all about the big picture. There is a reason that my sisters started taking drugs, which I understand completely. I think a lot about whether things could have been different. I survived just fine and have become who I am today because of, or in spite of it. And I'm quite happy with that. But I think a lot about my sisters, especially the oldest one who died. I can't visit her grave without crying. Not so much because she died, but more because of the life she led. The worst part is that my mom is buried in the same grave. Her being dead isn't the sad part, but rather that she was never really among us. So these are strong stories about difficult conditions in family. The next story is about the long-term changes and developments siblings describe. Of the starting when they really try to help siblings, help parents, do a lot of work to try to hold the family together. But with the time, they start to change the development, it changes relationships in family, it changes their own identity about themselves. I also have a story about that. This is sister have been a relative 30 years. I couldn't live my own life because there was always someone I felt guilty about or needed to help or offer support to. In the end, I felt suffocated, like I couldn't breathe. I can't save either my brother or my parents. They actually have to save themselves. It took a long time for this to fully sink in. I had a poor self-image for many years. So it's long-term consequences for siblings. And then, this is a strong finding. Siblings really think that their position is not that difficult than parents. They put parents' needs before their own. They do that before death, and they do that after death also. So siblings think, as one brother said, there's a difference between mom and me because he was a baby while I am a brother. And that also means that some siblings may have taken more distance from their brother or sister if it only have been about themselves. But they don't want to leave their parents alone with the situation. So they keep thinking about parents' position also in those choices. And the last story is about how the family also can need in lots of support and be an important role to give each other help and support. So this story told us a story of we. So being a close relative of his for a very long time, we did not think of it as having a person with a serious drug problem in the family. We knew he was using, we knew he was drinking. So the whole story as we are as a family who is together trying to manage a demanding situation and trying to help their family member with problematic substance use. So family can mean lots of support and the situation for brothers and sisters in that family is surely different than those in the first family presented. So our take-home message from that part of our research is that siblings should be seen. Siblings should be seen before death because their situation is really difficult often. As we said, siblings in multi-generation problem families surely should be seen. But also if we then think working with families in grief, so different family situations also mean different needs for help also after death. Okay, Kristina, would you come back? Special educator and project leader, Women of Parents.
So, how was it with sound and without the microphone? Should I go on without it or put it on?
Better with it on.
Put it on.
And I also forgot to mention that we have saved 50 minutes at the end, so you can ask questions at the end. Is that okay? So now I will present an article that is called Sounds of Silence, How Parents Experience Losing a Child to Drug-Related Death. And I'll start with a beautiful picture from Norway. So this is Norway. It's my home city where I'm born, in Bergen. This is how we like others to see Norway.
But it's not raining, so it's not raining.
Well, we have like 10 days without rain. This was one of those. But this is also Norway. We are pretty happy to be part of the Nordic welfare state system. All people in Norway expect to get services almost for free. But there are some people who we think are pretty marginalized, and when media write about them in the Norwegian papers, this is a typical picture that you will see in a Norwegian paper. No matter what the subject is, or the topic is, very often you will see that people who use drugs are visualized like this. So bear that in mind when I talk about my findings. So we're back here, we're still at work package 1 and about to read. And what I have done together with 2 of my project members is that I have done some interviews where we looked into how do parents experience drug bereavement and what different kinds of help and support they receive. We interviewed 7 mothers and 7 fathers who are parents to 14 deceased persons. So I'll jump straight to the results. When we did the reflexive thematic analysis, we found 4 main themes that describe drug death bereavement for parents. And as I mentioned, even though we didn't have an interview guide that looked into time before death, they all talk about time before death. And what they talk about is that they are in constant preparedness, and how they have been living before death influences their grief in that way that they carry with them the traumatic stresses, and I'll tell more about that on the next slide. The other theme is stigmatization, which they experience both before death and after death. But there are some differences that I'll get into. And they also describe an emotional overload and how they have complex relations to others. So what is this constant preparedness? This is a citation from Amalba. It is extremely difficult to live so close. Han becomes a very demanding person. These extreme situations where we have to call the police are very demanding. It is shocking, and especially it is very demanding to constantly have a person who is sick, right? It rarely goes well. Then things went well for a period of time. I was optimistic, and then it went downhill, right? It was like a roller coaster. So this constant preparedness also described in an extended parenthood. Most of us who are parents today experience that our children want us to take care of them, perhaps longer than our family generation. But this is even more extensive in regards to financial support, practical support. So the parents are really tired when they experience the death. They also talk a lot about how they have been rejected by professional helpers, and then keep in mind that in Norway we expect to get help for free. They also feel that they confidentially prevent collaboration, but at the same time they feel that the professionals expect them to help. So one mother, she called herself a helper without a license, because when they tried to help, they always got stopped by the confidential agreement. They experience this roller coaster with a range of ambivalent feelings such as fear and hope, and they tell about this roller coaster as a ride going deeper and deeper, and the ride up is getting shorter and shorter. About the findings about stigma, the parents describe a societal stigma before death. And they tell especially these stories about stigma in online statements, discussion forums, in the media, how people who use drugs are visualized in media. This really influences them, and they talk about it, how it also influenced them as bereaved. They perceive that society describe people who use drugs as an outcast group, and they also experience stigma from professionals working within health and welfare services. For example, in meetings trying to help the son or daughter, they feel like the professionals are talking to them instead of the person who actually needs help. Still in Norway, they experience that people presume that being addicted to drugs is self-inflicted, which is not in line with up-to-date best practices, they say. Though, parents do not describe that they perceive stigmatization due to being bereaved. So what is the stigma after death about? It's more about a spillover stigma, that the parents self-stigmatize themselves. They feel like they have failed as a parent. They feel shame and guilt for not being up to the job. And even though they meet people who doesn't stigmatize them, they often feel like one said, look for the blame in other people's eyes. So it doesn't necessarily reflect other people's thoughts or attitudes. So here's the citation from a parent that described this self-stigma. As a parent, you have a role, one that we couldn't really live up to, as we failed to play our role. We were supposed to protect your child, make your child independent and get them to leave the nest right. And somehow it does not work out. You haven't finished the task and it's kind of shameful. Yes, you failed a bit in living up to society's expectations, maybe in relation to your own social standing. I know it's not like that, but the feeling associated with this, that's the feeling, that's what the feelings say to me. Well, that's what makes it a little difficult. In the Norwegian research, we also found that it is really challenging to communicate about this. We have compared our results to, for example, the US, and many of the results where they in the US would describe it as stigma. The Norwegian parents describe some of the stigma, what the American called stigma, as challenging communication. But they have people in their work network that really wants to help them. They help them with practical tasks, for example, but it is so difficult to talk about the person who is dead, both for the bereaved themselves and for the network. And hence, many pull back, only share their thoughts with a few close family members, and do not get the support they need to adjust to the life after the loss. The issue for the bereaved, why they don't talk about it, is that they often are afraid that their grief is an unbearable burden to place on others, and that also hinders them to talk about the grief with their children or grandchildren. While others in the network are described as insecure and not knowing what to say. So, if we compare these results to other unnatural special deaths, we find much of the same as what others experience after, for example, murder, suicide, early child death. Many of the bereaved have mental and physical health difficulties, low levels of health-related quality of life, and also we have found in a register study in Norway that there are increased risk of early death for the bereaved parents. We have also looked into what is called special death. Is drug-related death special death? Special death are characterized by a high level of trauma, can be socially stigmatizing or extensively problematic, and their grief is often frequently disenfranchised. And the parents in our sample describe their grief as disenfranchised, not acknowledged. And here again, two pictures to illustrate that. Here's a picture illustrating sudden infant death. If you Google that, that's one of the pictures I found in Google, first in line, but this is a typical picture again of drug-related death, if you Google that. So, the not acknowledged grief often is associated by that this is self-inflicted. The person put it up on themselves, and that is why many feel that this grief is not acknowledged. And if we looked into the title of the song, some of you might have thought about Simon and Garfunkel's text, and that is correct. And the first time they Simon wrote the text in 1964, or he called it Sounds of Silence. And he writes, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sounds of silence. And this is what the parents are describing. They are describing the sounds of silence while the children are alive. They are describing the sounds of silence afterwards, not getting the help they expect to get from the Norwegian government, not getting any conversations with the social network, and they feel that neither them or others dare to disturb the sounds of silence. to be sharing, leading this project with Lilian. She's a social worker and a family therapist. Good job.
Thank you. Hopefully you are not overloaded with space for 2 more presentations. If you want to, you can just jump up and down and do anything. Or if you have the energy, please just sit. Thank you. I will present 2 papers that are about bereaved following drug-related death that are using drugs themselves. This is in work package 1. Friends, close friends that are using drugs themselves, 13 people. In the background for our focus is that people who use drugs often have a lot of close relationships with others that are using drugs. That means that they have a special risk of both witnessing overdoses and also of losing people that they love due to drug-related death. And also, we know that there is a complicated relationship between substance use and grief. We know that bereavement can increase drug use, and we know that people that are using drugs are especially in risk of developing complicated grief. Despite this, the experiences of people that are both drug-related bereaved and use drugs have been very little attention in research. So we interviewed 13 bereaved persons who reported using drugs. 7 women and 6 men between the age of 21 and 54. 7 reported that they had ongoing drug use at the time of the death. 2 were in treatment and 3 were not using drugs at the time. 9 were close friends with the deceased, 3 had lost an intimate partner, and 1 had lost an ex-partner. 3 of them had children with the deceased, and 2 of them were present when the person died. One of the articles is in review. It's a fruitful collaboration between 2 drug researchers, me and Sare, and 2 grief researchers, Kari Dyrgrad and Margaret Ströver. Inspired by narrative analysis, we explored how they narrate the relationship between the drug use and that they have lost a dear one. And we discussed the stories they tell through the lens of the dual process model of grief. And one of the stories a lot of them told was how drug use was used to manage the grief. They who were using drugs at the time told about more intense drug use. And the bereaved that were not using drugs at the time told about relapses, about new episodes of drug use. And they told that the drug use helped them in several ways. It calmed down the pain, it helped them see their grief more clearer, and it helped them getting closer to the deceased. For example, one of the girls here, called Eva, found her boyfriend dead after an overdose, and she has also traumatic memories of trying to save him without managing. And she said that the only thing that could help her was the habit. She said, nothing in the world can take away the pain of him dying in my arms, but it gave me a good kind of peace. It shuts off my emotions, all pain and all sorrows for a short period. Then it's possible to breathe and just be able to remember the good times, the good memories, the wonderful world. Because as soon as the heroin wore off, it was just grief and pain. And some of them also said that was the only thing they knew. Like Tom has said, this is the cards I have. I have not had a support system, so I have used drugs. And it works in part, it does. But I never got over it. And there's also a lot of people telling stories. We have told stories of silence. Due to the fact that the drug, they died of drug-related death, they tell about the risk of if I tell about them, then I also have to tell about my partner, my role. And talking about my own drug use is difficult. So not have to tell about themselves, they not tell about their spouse. Like Sarah has said, I have told very few people that I have a boyfriend who died with an overdose. That's maybe a bit because I know it leads to a lot of questions about my part in it. And I worked so hard to distance myself from the whole drug scene and my own drug history. So in order to avoid having to open up about myself, I have avoided talking about it. And there's also a lot of stories about guilt and responsibility. So stories about that I did enough to try to help him, or that I had a role in getting the drugs, or that we had an agreement that we should not call the ambulance, that they had some part in it that they had a lot of thoughts about afterwards. And the grief research has shown that when people you love die sudden and unexpected, it's normal to have thoughts about guilt and responsibility. But I think the special thing here is the silence about it. Because they know that my role, I can't talk about it, people won't understand. So there's silence about the guilt, and though not getting help of how to deal with their thoughts about guilt and responsibility. And some of the people tell stories, not so many, but we find these stories really interesting. Stories of the death as a transformative life event. That the death made them think new thoughts and reflections that gave an impact on their own drug use. It was thoughts like, for example, this girl said that I have previously used drugs very, very uncritically. I have been close to death many, many times. So in a way, it's like I understood something which I kind of knew. I understood that death is final. Because I got that, right, yes, it is so final. Even though I knew, I had known so many who died, and I know what it's like. It was like when you have been so close, because she lost her dear, dear boyfriend. For the first time, I think I was a bit afraid of death. And she also said that when she was close to her own difficult feelings, she saw the grief of her parents, she saw the grief of her boyfriend's parents, and she said to see how painful it is for the parents to attend to their son's funeral, only to know that my mother has planned mine. That is really powerful. Then I started to think that maybe I should think that my death is not really about me. So if I continue to do drugs and I die, it's actually not about me. Because it's those left behind I have to live with my life. So perhaps it's okay to live life a bit for someone else too. And she said that thoughts made her go into the treatment. So some of the things we are discussing in this article is firstly that the drug use seems to try to handle overload. A lot of them tell when they lost their dear one, they didn't know how to manage the situation without drugs. And I think that's really important knowledge, to know that people using drugs or have been using drugs are really at risk when they are getting bereaved. And also that their feelings are normal, their grief reactions are normal, but the way they deal with it is not accepted in our culture. That makes them alone, that makes them silenced, that makes them in risk of not having support. That's so important when we are in grief. And we also found that a lot of them told that the drugs are helping them calming the pain, but it's not processing the grief. So when they are in a situation they want to handle life without drug use, they are very insecure of how to deal with my grief. So they have a really strong lack of belief in coping with the grief without drug use. So I think in drug treatment, we really need to develop knowledge about how to help them in this situation. Okay, just a few words of the other article. It's published this year in the Journal of Social Work, and it's about how they tell about their experiencing of getting help and support. It's the same people that have been interviewed here. They told that they have not been experienced, acknowledged as one of the bereaved in need of help. Despite the fact, as Christina told about, that we in our welfare system has a system for support when you are bereaved after sudden and unexpected death, they are not there. And they also felt unseen as bereaved from their social support and also from the drug treatment system. A lot of them were in drug treatment when this was happening, but they were not seen as bereaved, as people in grief. And when they got help, the help was focusing on the drug use and of reducing the drug use, not to the grief. As this girl said, she was in treatment. For me, that was what it was all about. I found my boyfriend dead. I wanted to talk about it. The people were more concerned with, but you are on drugs. We have to make sure you don't do drugs again. Because she hadn't been using drugs for several months. Then her boyfriend died. She started using drugs. She went into the treatment. And she said, I know everything about the drug stuff. I just need help to handle the grief. We also found that the substance use hinders social contact between them and their social network and the family members. The bereaved person's use of drugs led to a mutual withdrawal between them. They went away from the family and they experienced the family disappear from them since they were using drugs. And they also tell that between other people using drugs, the grief was not a theme there either, because everyone had lost someone. It was a struggle. You just have to use drugs and you don't talk feelings in this environment. And a lot of them told that they were not feeling welcome to gatherings and ceremonies due to the drug use. So there was a lot of arenas that could be helpful for processing grief that they had excluded from, or excluded themselves from. Some people told about unconditioned help and support. There were support that were given although they were using drugs. It was unconditioned and adapted to their life situation. And it was offered in a way that enabled them to receive it. And they were offered help, outreaching, and repeated. So, my conclusion is that there is a lack of help and support when those bereaved who use drugs face drug-related death. And there are complex reactions displayed by the bereaved when they face drug-related death. Because they're using drugs, because they don't want to talk about grief, it's also difficult to reach them. So I think it points to the importance of professionals in the field of substance use treatment to have knowledge of grief and how to provide grief support for this group. Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Nick Hussos, social worker, family therapist, and a really hard-working PhD candidate in our project.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Yes. Now I'm going to. Actually, I thought when I went into the PhD program, I thought I would do a qualitative work, but then I was called up and I asked, we have some quantitative data we would like to look at. So could you do it? What? I haven't had math since high school. How do you think? Yeah. But it is actually possible. So I've done this second article of my PhD. It's quantitative investigations of the social health domain of those who are bereaved by drug-related deaths. And we've heard a lot about, in Christina's and Lilian's and Sari's stories about how the bereavement affects the social relationships and how it's difficult to talk about, stories of silence, stories of withdrawal from others. And in the survey, we had quantitative data that tapped into some of these dimensions that we also wanted to see. Yeah, can we say something across the different relationships to the deceased, across the whole sample, and also then have better a better foundation for generalizing these findings. So these variables that we had in the survey that tapped into the social domain, or the social variables, I struggle a lot with what kind of concepts we use for these variables, because social support didn't quite catch it all. So I decided with help from my supervisors, decided on the concept of social health. And when the article was under review, I got it back and got the feedback that, yeah, you have to define social health. What is that? Generally health is often something we talk about, which are not defined very, very concrete often. But Marta Huber and colleagues not far from here, I think here in the Netherlands, they proposed a definition of health in an intervention article in 2011 as the ability to adapt and self-manage. And they've also proposed that social health should be considered the third health domain, along with mental health and physical health. So, definition, Sunmi Shu and colleagues from South Korea, they did an investigation on articles that use this concept, social health, and they proposed to divide it into two perspectives: the micro level, which considers the quality of the social relations and the capacity to participate in social life for the community, and also the macro level, which is the overall social cohesion and resilience of society. And this study, these things I'm presenting here, takes part then at the micro level of social health, the quality of the social relations and the capacity to participate in social life, community. And the article is available in death studies there. So what do we know about social variables and complicated grief reactions? We do know that adjustment to work and social life after death correlates with complicated grief reactions. Has been shown in several studies, often measured with measure a scale, a work and social adjustment scale, which we've also used in our study. And we also know that perceived social support is a risk factor for mental ill health in general, and complicated grief reactions also after bereavement. Furthermore, we know from studies on suicidal bereavement that withdrawal from others are common. And also we know that withdrawal from others correlates with psychosocial difficulties and prolonged grief reactions after various sudden deaths, and also in drug-related deaths, as among other Christina's research has shown. And furthermore, we know that improved connection with others are predictive of reduction in mental health problems after a loss. So there are, not surprisingly, a high correlation between sort of this here and this happening between us. And so my research questions were, how do DAT people rate aspects of their social health? And does social health rating differ according to the health experience of those bereaved? And this figure, you know, and my study also is situated here at Work Package 1. It's, I'm using the whole sample and with 255 family members and friends. So there are most parents, 90 parents, 94, 95. Yeah, and siblings and children over 18 years, and extended family members, and also partners or close friends in this sample. And we used 5 measurements. It was the crisis support scale, which measures perceived and obtained support, worker social adjustment scale, and 2 single items, which was either withdrawn from others after the death, or others have withdrawn from me. And also we used a form that measured health-related quality of life, which also do have items concerning the social health dimension. So the results here, very many numbers. What actually can be taken away just from these numbers is that mostly it's quite evenly distributed, the scores. It's not so that parents are much higher or much lower than others, or children are much higher and much lower. They're quite evenly distributed. Extended family members score somewhat higher than the others. Partners or friends score somewhat lower on most measures. And children, we can see here, they report higher degree of withdrawal from others after the death. It was measured in a Likert scale from 1 to 5, so they have here average on 3.4 here, which is, I would say, high. And to contextualize some of these results, and here we look at the whole population. We look at health-related quality of life, the mental component. So the DLT bereavement in our sample, they score 40.2. And if we compare with the population in Norway, the population norm is 51.8, a bit old numbers, but anyway, so that's very much higher. And actually, we didn't find so many studies that use this form, but we found a study that on patients with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a neurodegenerative disease, which is quite horrible, actually. And there are no cure for that disease. And patients there scored on average 39.7, so almost the same as this group. We look at the adjustment to work social scale. Our group scored 12.7, and here is low score, it's better. And if you look at the clinical group, those who got treatment from complicated grief group in the USA, they scored considerably higher, that means worse than our group. But the control group that did not have any problems concerning complicated grief, they scored a lot better. So this population scores somewhat in between here. And then we have the social support, crisis and support scale. Our group score 28. It measures positive support, the perceived positive support from surroundings. And a Swedish study on those bereaved after the tsunami in the Indian Ocean in 2004, measured 1 year afterwards, scored 30.7 here averagely, so it's also considerably higher than our population. And then I have withdrawn from others. We can see that 67% of our sample had done that in some to high degree. And compared to those bereaved from suicide, accidents, and sudden infant deaths that reported in another study in Norway, scored considerably lower than our group. And finally, we have the measure on others have withdrawn. And here we have no comparison group. 46% of our group on that. Yes, and then we looked at whether there were associations to the help they have received. And no claims of causation here because this is a cross-sectional study, so we wanted to look if there were associations to whether there were indications that help could be beneficial for this group, professional psychosocial help. So we investigated both the groups that had received help, compared them with those who had not received help. And in the group that had received help, we looked at those who had high satisfaction with help, medium satisfaction with help, and low satisfaction with help. And the findings were that there were no significant differences in the social health dimensions on those who had received help versus those who had not received help. But there were significant differences between those who had the psychosocial help they had received with high satisfaction versus those who had created it with lower satisfaction. And this was a linear relationship on all scales, except for others have withdrawn from it. So these are the main findings. DRD bereaved people report on average relatively poor social health, also compared to other bereaved populations. The scores are relatively evenly distributed between different relationships. Extended family reports somewhat better scores in all dimensions, and children report a greater degree on own withdrawal than others, from others. The social health dimensions measured here are not correlated with time since death. That indicates that those who lost a long time ago do not have better social health than those who have lost recently. And those bereaved who are more satisfied with health also report better scores in various dimensions of social health. How much time? 4 minutes? Yeah, that's great. That's all I need for the last thing. So we discussed how can these findings be understood or explained, and in the discussion we hypothesized that reduced social health might largely be explained by the strain before death, and the stigma before death, and the shame before and after the death, and maybe some sort of dynamic or mechanism could be that in many families problematic substance use are regarded as a family matter, and family members may experience the shame and guilt for close ties to the person concerned or being part of a family with these problems, which might again lead to distancing from other social relationships. And we also have this concept of the circular causality of social health. So it's not just how I relate to others, it's how others relate to me. And my way of relating to others affects how others relate to me. What earlier studies have shown is that network members' insecurity on how can you support in this situation for the one who is bereaved. They don't necessarily know it. And in another study, one social network member said, "We thought we wanted to be alone." So this can lead to sort of mutual misunderstandings, also mutual withdrawal from those who could have been supportive in this situation. And one of my supervisors, Carly Dillegaard, and her husband, in a book, in a study they did several years ago, they found that openness was a medicine for this problem. So that the bereaved persons sometimes had to educate the social network members on what support they wanted and how they could approach them. And this was also both ways from the social network members to "I am insecure, what do you need?" And we think an important question is how health services, support services can contribute to such openness. And another question is what health measures can positively affect the micro level of social health. And we do argue that early interventions involving both bereaved and social network members have greater potential to improve the social health of bereaved family members. Yep. And there are strength and limitations. And, thank you very much. So we have some minutes now at the end, and I hope you are all